At a prestigious American high school where wealth and reputation ruled the halls, a pack of bullies never thought twice about consequences. When they set their sights on a quiet black girl who kept her blouse crisp and white, they saw only vulnerability. Someone easy to embarrass, easy to control. What they didn't see was the fire built from years of hardship, or the MMA training that simmered beneath her calm. When their so-called prank turned mean, she faced a choice: back down or defend her dignity. They picked the wrong target. The final bell rang sharp through Grant High's corridors. Evelyn Brooks, a 67-year-old grandmother raising her late daughter's teen boy, adjusted her white blouse and gripped her book bag tightly. Around her, students rushed past in a blur of chatter and laughter, their weekend plans already taking shape. Evelyn kept her head high but her eyes forward, moving with the steady grace of someone who had lived long enough to know when not to flinch. A group of younger students bumped her shoulder without so much as a glance back. Evelyn had learned long ago that being one of the few black women at Grant meant becoming an expert at walking these halls with deliberate precision. The main hallway was crowded as usual. Red varsity jackets, flashy jewelry, expensive handbags. She turned down a side corridor with peeling paint and quiet lockers, preferring her usual exit out back. Her flip phone buzzed in her pocket. She smiled when she saw her daughter-in-law's name. "Hey, Marcia." Evelyn's voice softened. "Don't forget, we're having supper at Aunt Clara's tonight," Marcia reminded her warmly. "She wants to hear all about your community college essay." Evelyn nodded, though Marcia couldn't see it. "I've got it drafted. That application deadline's right around the corner." "That's my girl," Marcia said proudly. "You've worked hard for this." The weight of their shared dreams pressed against Evelyn's chest. For her, going back to school wasn't just about learning. It was about proving cycles could be broken, even late in life. "I'm going to make it happen," Evelyn said firmly. "You always do. Be home by 5. Love you." "Love you too." Evelyn slipped the phone away and pushed open the heavy back door. The autumn air met her, crisp, tinged with smoke and dried leaves. The shortcut past the dumpsters and bleachers was worth it to avoid the rowdy crowd out front. Gravel crunched underfoot as her thoughts drifted back to her essay. How she'd written about martial arts training, about finding strength in discipline, peace in power. What she hadn't put down was how those same skills made her feel safe in a school where she often felt anything but. A burst of laughter snapped her attention forward. Near the rusting dumpsters stood a group she knew all too well. Thomas Reynolds leaned against the metal bin, his red varsity jacket bright against the grime. Margaret Collins stood beside him in her cheer uniform, phone tilted at her side. Donald Price and Charles Davis flanked them like bodyguards, all smirks and sneers. They whispered, but their eyes never left her. Margaret lifted her phone, ready to record. Thomas's grin carried a mean edge. Evelyn slowed. Years of training had taught her to read the signs, the subtle way they blocked her path, Charles's fists clenching, Donald bouncing on his toes like a boxer waiting for a bell. She could turn back, but that would mean giving them the space, surrendering. And Evelyn had swallowed enough indignities in her lifetime. Her spine straightened. Each step forward crunched louder on the gravel. Thomas slid in front of her, tall and smirking. "Well now, Miss Brooks, heading out already?" His tone was sugary sweet with menace. Margaret circled left, phone trained steady. "What's the rush? Got another scholarship essay to scribble out?" She dragged out the word scholarship like it was a joke. "Must be nice," Donald chimed in, blocking her other side. "All those special chances handed to you." Evelyn took a slow breath, centering herself as her sensei had drilled into her. Calm body, steady mind. She tried to step around Thomas, but he shifted with her, cutting her off. "I said, I need to get home." Her voice was firm, even. Charles barked out a harsh laugh. Listen to her, trying to sound all proper. Evelyn Brooks adjusted the strap of her canvas book bag as the final bell echoed down the wide, gleaming corridors of Grant High School. The sound was sharp, metallic, The kind of bell that left no doubt the school day had ended. The younger students scattered like birds freed from a cage, their sneakers squeaking across the polished linoleum, their chatter bouncing off the high ceiling. They laughed, shoved each other playfully, tossed textbooks into lockers without a care. For most, it was just another Friday afternoon in late autumn. For Evelyn, 67 years old and in her second act of education, the hallway was more obstacle course than passageway. She walked steadily, her crisp white blouse buttoned to the collar, her posture upright as if she carried an invisible weight that demanded dignity. Her hair, silver, carefully braided back, shone beneath the fluorescent lights. Students glanced at her but quickly looked away, unsure how to categorize the older woman in their midst. Some called her Granny Brooks, behind her back. Others simply pretended she wasn't there. Evelyn knew better than to expect warmth. Being one of the few black women enrolled in Grant High, here to complete her long-delayed diploma and set an example for her grandson, meant she was both visible and invisible at once. She had lived too many years, worked too many factory shifts, and buried too many loved ones to waste energy worrying about teenage opinions. Still, there was a sting each time a group brushed past her, eyes sliding away as if she were a ghost haunting the halls of privilege. Grant High was no ordinary school. It was old, moneyed, steeped in generations of alumni whose names graced plaques, libraries, and athletic fields. The Reynolds, Collins, Prescott, Davis, and Price families had all built the institution, or so they liked to remind anyone who would listen. Their children wore red varsity jackets that weren't merely symbols of athletic success, but badges of inheritance, sewn with entitlement. Evelyn had learned quickly that these jackets carried weight. Teachers bent rules, coaches looked the other way, principals deferred judgment. If you wore one, you belonged. If you didn't, you were reminded often. Evelyn, of course, did not belong. She chose her exit carefully, turning down the quieter east corridor instead of braving the crowded front doors. The east hall had peeling blue lockers, some rusted shut, relics from the 1970s. The paint curled like old wallpaper, and the overhead lights flickered with a faint buzz. Students rarely used this route. It smelled faintly of must and floor wax, but Evelyn preferred it. It was away from the crowds, away from the jeering whispers that seemed to follow her when she walked near the front steps. Her book bag felt heavier today, though she carried only her worn copy of American Government, a spiral notebook half filled with neat cursive, and her old Dell laptop with a missing key. Maybe it wasn't the bag that weighed her down, but the years, the decades of unfinished business that had finally brought her here. She thought briefly of her grandson, Terrence, 15 years old, waiting for her at home. He struggled with his own classes, with his own battles, and it mattered to her that he saw her fight to finish what life had interrupted. Education is power, she often told him. If I can walk these halls at 67, you can make it through, too. Outside, through a grimy window at the end of the hall, Evelyn glimpsed the late afternoon sun dropping low behind the oak trees. Their leaves burned gold and red, the kind of beauty that always reminded her of her late husband, Samuel, who used to rake piles of leaves just so Terrence could jump in them. She allowed herself one small smile before the air shifted, before instinct told her she was no longer alone. It was subtle at first. A burst of laughter, too loud for the empty corridor. The faint scuff of sneakers not heading toward the front exit but trailing behind her. Evelyn slowed her pace, every nerve on alert. She had learned to read rooms long before she'd ever stepped into Grant High. Learned it in factory break rooms where men twice her size tried to corner her into silence. In landlords' offices where late payment fees somehow doubled for families like hers. In church committees where her suggestions were ignored until repeated by someone with lighter skin. She could smell hostility before it showed its teeth, and it was here now, in this deserted hallway, creeping closer with every step. When she reached the steel back door that led toward the dumpsters and the chain-link fence, Evelyn's heart sank. They were waiting for her. 4 of them. Thomas Reynolds leaned casually against the green dumpster, his 6'2" frame draped in his bright red varsity jacket. His blonde hair caught the last rays of sunlight, giving him a halo he did not deserve. His family's money had paved half the parking lot, and he never let anyone forget it. Margaret Collins stood beside him, phone already in hand, recording low by her hip with the sly smile of someone who thought humiliation was entertainment. Her cheerleader uniform was spotless, though her heart was anything but. On either side, Donald Price and Charles Davis formed a wall of muscle, their matching jackets stretched tight across broad shoulders. They smirked, bouncing on their heels, eager for whatever came next. They weren't talking now. They didn't need to. Their positioning told the story. Dumpster at her left, fence at her right. 4 teenagers ahead. They had closed the circle with practiced ease. This wasn't chance. It was a hunt. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken, though her face remained calm. She took one slow breath, the way her sensei had taught her years ago in that cramped martial arts gym on the south side of town. Breathe in, steady the mind. Breathe out, settle the body. She knew how to fight. More importantly, she knew when not to. But the danger here wasn't fists or chokeholds. It was narrative. If she lashed out, they'd twist it. If she raised her voice, they'd call her aggressive. If she defended herself, the video Margaret was filming would be cut, clipped, spread across social media until she was painted as the villain. It had happened before, to others, to her own community. Evelyn had lived long enough to know the truth could be buried under the weight of privilege. Still, she wasn't going to turn back. To retreat now would mean surrendering even this narrow corridor, letting them own one more piece of space that was hers to walk. Number. She would continue forward, one step at a time, spine straight, chin level. The gravel outside crunched underfoot as she pushed through the door. The late afternoon air was crisp, carrying the smell of smoke from a nearby chimney. Evelyn gripped her bag tighter and moved forward, her shoes clicking against the pavement. Thomas straightened from his perch on the dumpster, blocking her path fully now. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice dripping false charm. "Leaving so soon, Miss Brooks?" Donald chuckled. "She's always rushing. Maybe she's got an essay due." Margaret tilted her phone upward, no longer hiding the recording. "What's the hurry, Evelyn? Got some scholarship to beg for?" The words cut sharp, designed to sting, to make her feel small. Evelyn met Margaret's gaze without flinching, though she could feel her pulse drumming in her throat. "I need to get home," she said evenly. Her voice carried a calm authority that only age could give. "Oh, hear that?" Charles sneered, flexing his fists. "She needs to get home. Better let her through, Tom." But Thomas didn't budge. He leaned in closer, the faint smell of cologne and arrogance clinging to him. "Come on, Evelyn, don't be like that. We're just talking." His grin widened, flashing too many teeth. Evelyn kept her hands steady at her sides. The urge to break his grip before it even came was strong, but she resisted. Instead, she repeated, "I said, I need to get home." Margaret laughed, circling left with her phone raised higher. "Listen to her, so proper, always talking like she's better than us." Donald's laugh was cruel, ugly. "Maybe she thinks that blouse makes her a lady. Maybe she thinks she belongs here." The words stirred an old ache in Evelyn's chest. She had heard versions of that sneer all her life. "You don't belong here. Not in this school, not in this town, not in this America." Yet here she stood, blouse crisp, book bag heavy with effort, dignity intact. She kept walking. The gravel seemed louder now, crunching like thunder in the silence between their taunts. Inside, her muscles coiled. Ready. Not because she wanted the fight, but because she knew it was coming. And when it did, she would be ready. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt, and Evelyn Brooks felt every one of them stretching toward her like fingers. She had already marked her exit, the chain-link gate at the far end of the service lane. But 4 young bodies, clothed in entitlement and varsity pride, stood between her and freedom. Thomas Reynolds stepped forward first, his broad shoulders filling the narrow space. He wore his family's wealth like armor, red jacket gleaming, hair combed as though every strand was chosen. Behind him, Donald Price and Charles Davis moved in sync, closing the angles, their hands flexing as though itching for action. Margaret Collins, cheer uniform pressed and spotless, circled with her phone lifted now, no attempt at subtlety. The faint red light on the screen blinked like a recording of judgment already written. Evelyn stopped, not because she wanted to, but because the way Thomas tilted his chin and spread his stance told her plainly, "You don't pass unless we say so." "Bet that's how you fool all those admissions folks, huh?" Donald called out, his voice slick with mockery. "Acting proper, talking like you own the place." Margaret smirked, sliding closer, her phone camera now aimed at Evelyn's face. "What's with the hair today?" she asked with fake curiosity, stretching her free hand toward Evelyn's carefully braided crown. "Trying to look professional for those scholarship interviews?" The hand reached closer, and Evelyn jerked back instinctively. In doing so, her shoulder bumped into a solid chest. Charles had stepped in silently from behind, closing the trap. Now the circle was sealed. Her pulse raced, but her breathing remained steady. Years of martial arts training whispered from memory. "Don't panic. Control your breath. Control the moment." "Don't touch me," Evelyn said, her voice low but clear, carrying the gravity of someone who had survived too many storms to mince words. "Not any of you." Thomas's grin widened, showing teeth that looked less like charm and more like cruelty. "Or what?" he drawled. "You'll report us? File some complaint? Come on, we're just having fun." His hand shot out suddenly, clamping down on Evelyn's arm. His fingers dug into her skin, strong and deliberate. Margaret giggled, zooming in her phone lens to capture Evelyn's face. "Maybe we should help her practice for those interviews," she sneered. "Tell us all about your struggles, Evelyn. About how hard life is when you're so special." Donald made exaggerated air quotes with his fingers. "Yeah, real special. Bet the school board eats that up." Evelyn tried to pull her arm free, but Thomas's grip tightened, his thumb pressing painfully against the inside of her elbow. She could break free. She knew exactly how. But she also knew the game they were playing. The video would be cut, edited, spun. One move too sharp, and the story would become hers to defend while their lies spread unchecked. "Let go," she said, her voice even, though fire rose in her chest. "Now." Charles stepped closer, his shadow falling across both of them. "Or what? You'll call your daddy?" he asked with a cruel grin. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice so the words struck like a blow. "Oh, wait." The insult landed heavy. Evelyn's father had been gone decades, a veteran whose medals sat in a shoebox in her closet. The cruelty was not in the truth of the words, but in the intent to wound. Her free hand curled into a fist, knuckles pressing hard against her palm. She forced it to unclench slowly, whispering inside, "Don't give them what they want. Don't give them an excuse." Margaret's laugh rang high and sharp. "Aw, look, we made her mad. That'll look great for the camera." Evelyn turned her head, meeting Margaret's smirk directly. Her face, though calm, carried all the weight of lived years. Nights working double shifts, mornings walking into factories where supervisors ignored her name, afternoons holding her grandson's trembling hands after he was bullied. Margaret could capture her image, but she could not capture her truth. Still, the circle pressed tighter. Thomas's grip slid upward, settling on her shoulder now, deceptively casual but heavy with threat. "We're just trying to help you understand your place here, Miss Brooks," he said, his voice darkening. "Nothing personal." "My place?" Evelyn asked before she could stop herself, the words breaking free like a spark in dry grass. "Yeah," Thomas snapped, the grin dropping. "Your place, because some of us actually earned our spots here. Our families built this school, and we're tired of people like you acting like you deserve something just because." The sentence was cut short by Evelyn's movement. Smooth, efficient, practiced. She twisted away from his grip using a basic escape maneuver, careful not to cause him injury, just enough to free herself. "I earned everything I have," she said, her voice firm, her stance grounded. Margaret gasped theatrically and turned her phone toward the boys. "Did you hear that? She thinks she earned it." Her tone was mocking, syrupy sweet with venom. Let's show her what earning really means. Charles cracked his knuckles, stepping forward like a wrestler about to enter a ring. It happened quickly. Thomas lunged from behind, his long arm snaking around Evelyn's neck, locking into a crude chokehold. His forearm pressed against her throat, lifting her slightly off balance. Not a professional hold, not clean or technical, but it didn't need to be. It was meant to humiliate, to scare, to hurt. The others cheered, their voices echoing against the brick walls of the service lane. Margaret moved closer, camera raised high, capturing Evelyn's face as she struggled for air. "Smile for the camera, Miss Brooks," Margaret jeered. Panic flared in Evelyn's chest as pressure closed her airway. Her lungs burned, vision blurring at the edges. She could hear Donald imitating her gasps, Charles egging Thomas on, Margaret's cruel laughter rising above them all. Her body screamed for oxygen, muscles twitching, mind spinning. Yet through the haze came a voice, strong and steady in memory. Her sensei, 6 months ago in a dim gym lined with sweat-stained mats. "Your breath is your life, Evelyn. Never let anyone control it. Remember your training." Something shifted inside her. Time slowed. She felt Thomas's arm not as a prison, but as points of contact. Pressure here, weakness there. She had drilled this 100 times. Her fingers dug sharply into the nerves along his forearm. Precision over strength. Thomas yelped as his grip loosened just enough. Evelyn dropped her weight suddenly, slipping free of the hold, creating a pocket of space. "What the—" Thomas started, but Evelyn was already moving. Her hip turned, her hands guiding his arm as his own momentum betrayed him. In a single practiced motion, she redirected his force and sent him sprawling onto the asphalt. He landed flat on his back, the wind exploding from his lungs in a humiliating grunt. The cheering cut short. Margaret's phone wavered in her hand. Thomas rolled to his side, wheezing. Donald and Charles exchanged a startled glance, then lunged forward. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her body loose but ready. Every muscle remembered what her mind whispered. Stay calm, stay controlled, defend, don't strike. Thomas Reynolds' body hit the asphalt with a hollow thud, the sound echoing down the empty service lane. For a moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn Brooks stood in the center of the circle, her shoulders squared, chest heaving from the sudden burst of motion. She hadn't hurt him. Her throw was controlled, just enough to take him down. But the shock of watching a 67-year-old woman send the most popular boy in school sprawling had stunned even the bullies who thought they owned these grounds. Donald Price was the first to recover, his laughter sharp and ugly. "You see that?" he barked, pointing as Thomas scrambled to his knees. "Granny thinks she's Bruce Lee." Margaret Collins' face flushed, her phone jerking as she struggled to keep filming. Her polished cheerleader's smirk twisted into something meaner, darker. "Don't let her show you up, Tom. Make her pay for that." Charles Davis cracked his knuckles, his voice a low growl. "She's dead meat." Thomas rose unsteadily, brushing dirt from his red varsity jacket, his expression shifting from disbelief to fury. His cheeks burned red beneath his perfectly styled blonde hair. He had never been humiliated in front of his friends before, never been thrown down like some rag doll. The entitlement in his veins screamed for revenge. Without warning, he lunged again, this time not clumsy, not casual. His long arm wrapped around Evelyn's throat from behind, locking into a crude chokehold. His forearm pressed across her windpipe, his bicep crushing against the side of her neck. He hauled her backward, lifting her partially off her feet. Evelyn gasped as her airway constricted. The world tilted, sound muffling into a high-pitched whine. Thomas's hot breath filled her ear as he snarled, "Smile for the camera, Brooks." "Let's see you laugh now." Margaret laughed cruelly, moving closer with her phone aimed high. "Oh, this is gold," she cooed. "Keep going, Tom. She's turning red already." Donald and Charles whooped encouragement, egging him on, bouncing in place like boys ringside at a fight. Donald mimicked Evelyn's flailing arms with exaggerated gasps, while Charles leaned forward, his face lit with sick amusement. The hold was sloppy but effective. Evelyn's feet scraped against the asphalt, her shoes searching for purchase. Panic clawed at her chest as oxygen slipped away. Her hands gripped Thomas's arm, nails digging in, but the lack of air muddied her thoughts. The edges of her vision blurred. Shapes bled into shadows. Their laughter became distant, muffled, as though she were underwater. Her chest burned. For a terrifying moment, she almost surrendered to the black fog closing in. And then, like a candle lit in the dark, came a memory. 6 months earlier, the smell of sweat and leather filled a dim martial arts gym on the south side of town. Mats worn smooth from decades of use covered the floor. Evelyn stood in her GI, sweat dripping down her temples, her arms trembling from drills. Her sensei, a wiry man in his 70s with eyes like polished stone, circled her. He had slipped behind her then, demonstrating a chokehold with precision. His forearm pressed gently but firmly against her throat. "This," he said, his voice calm, "is what fear feels like. Your body will tell you to panic, but panic is the enemy. Remember this, Evelyn. Your breath is your life. Never let anyone control it." He released her then, stepping back. She had coughed, rubbing her neck. "But what if they're stronger?" she asked, still catching her breath. Her sensei's eyes softened. "Then you use their strength against them. You've lived long enough to know. Life will always try to choke the breath out of you, but you're still standing. That means you know how to fight back." The memory burned bright in Evelyn's mind now, cutting through the haze. She was not a victim. She was not powerless. She had trained for this. Her awareness sharpened. Every point of contact with Thomas's arm became clear. The crook of his elbow pressed against her windpipe, his wrist poorly aligned, his grip more about anger than technique. His stance was wrong. Too upright, his center of gravity unstable. Slowly, deliberately, Evelyn's fingers found the pressure point along his forearm, the one her sensei had drilled her on again and again. With precision born from countless repetitions, she dug in hard. Thomas grunted in pain, his grip loosening just a fraction. It was all she needed. Evelyn dropped her weight suddenly, bending her knees and twisting her shoulders inward. The shift created space, breaking the seal around her throat. She gulped a thin stream of precious air, the fire in her lungs easing. "What the?" Thomas gasped, but before he could tighten again, Evelyn's hips turned, her hands guiding his arm. She pivoted sharply, using his forward momentum against him. In a smooth, practiced motion, she executed a hip throw. Thomas's tall frame lifted briefly into the air before crashing down flat on his back. The impact shook the asphalt, the sound echoing off the metal dumpsters. He wheezed, the air driven out of his lungs with a satisfying whoosh. Margaret's phone jolted as her jaw fell open. The confidence in her smirk dissolved, replaced with shock. "Tom!" she cried out. But Evelyn wasn't finished. Charles, emboldened by rage, charged forward. His bulk bore down on her like a runaway train. Evelyn sidestepped with practiced grace, hooking her shoulder under his arm and guiding his momentum past her. With a controlled twist, she sent him sprawling face first onto the pavement. He skidded, palms scraping raw against gravel. Donald hesitated, eyes darting from Thomas groaning on the ground to Charles sprawled by the dumpster. For a moment, The bravado slipped. He raised his hands. "Hey, wait a second." But adrenaline drove him forward anyway. He swung wildly, fists flailing without discipline. Evelyn deflected each strike with textbook blocks, forearm against forearm, redirecting rather than clashing. When he overextended, she trapped his arm and pivoted, using his momentum to send him tumbling onto the ground beside his friends. Margaret stumbled back, panic flashing in her eyes. She turned to run, but Evelyn caught her wrist, not to harm, just enough pressure to remind her who held control. "Delete it," Evelyn said, her voice rough from the chokehold, but steady as stone. I can't," Margaret stammered, her bravado gone, phone trembling in her hand. Evelyn applied the smallest twist to her wrist. A reminder, not a threat. "Delete it." Margaret's fingers fumbled as she unlocked the phone. With a shaky breath, she erased the video. Evelyn released her, stepping back, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. Around her, the so-called rulers of Grant High lay scattered, groaning on the pavement, their red jackets dirty, their pride torn. The service door creaked open. Ms. Patel, the quiet chemistry teacher, stepped outside with a stack of papers in her arm. She froze, eyes widening as she took in the scene. The dumpsters, the groaning boys, Evelyn standing calm in the center. For a long moment, silence held. The only sound was the ragged breathing of those who had thought they owned the world. Ms. Patel's gaze lingered on Evelyn, and what she saw was not aggression, not recklessness, but restraint. Each move had been defensive, precise, controlled. Evelyn had not sought a fight. She had endured one, and in doing so she had revealed a strength far greater than fists. The bullies groaned, gathering themselves. Thomas rolled to his side, his face twisted in rage and fear. "You're crazy," he wheezed, spitting dirt from his mouth. But his voice lacked its former power. Donald and Charles staggered to their feet, keeping their distance now. Margaret clutched her wrist, eyes darting between her phone and Evelyn, fear flickering beneath her glare. They had expected an easy victim. Instead, they had been dismantled by a woman their grandparents' age. Evelyn stood tall, her blouse rumpled, hair slightly loose, throat tender from the chokehold. But her eyes, calm, unwavering, cut sharper than any blow. "Don't," she said simply when Thomas opened his mouth again. "Just don't." The late afternoon sun stretched long across the cracked asphalt. A breeze rustled the leaves piled against the chain-link fence. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken truth. The power dynamics of this schoolyard had shifted, even if only for a moment. Evelyn touched her throat gently, feeling the lingering ache where Thomas's arm had been. The calm after training washed over her, a clarity that came only after surviving what should have broken her. She thought of her mother's voice, long gone but echoing still. Sometimes standing up for yourself means showing people exactly who you are. Evelyn had shown them. And for the first time, the bullies weren't laughing. For a long second, the world seemed frozen. Evelyn Brooks stood with her blouse rumpled, her throat raw from Thomas Reynolds' chokehold. Yet her stance remained steady. The boys who had circled her like wolves now staggered on the cracked asphalt, their red jackets dusty, their egos shattered. Margaret Collins clutched her phone with trembling fingers, fear flickering behind her defiant glare. The afternoon light slanted across the service lane, painting long shadows behind them. Evelyn felt her pulse slowing, breath gradually steadying again. She should have walked away then. She had proven enough. But she knew the fight wasn't over. Because pride, when bruised, can be more dangerous than fists. Thomas dragged himself up to his knees, fury twisting his handsome face into something feral. "You think you can make a fool out of me?" he hissed, his voice hoarse from the fall. Donald and Charles flanked him, one rubbing his scraped palms, the other shaking off the ache in his shoulder. They looked less sure of themselves now, but shame and adrenaline were powerful fuels. Margaret's phone lifted again, this time steadier, capturing Evelyn with a predator's intent. Evelyn recognized the look. They weren't finished. Not until they had something to twist into their narrative. Something they could spin as crazy old Evelyn attacking innocent students. The circle reformed. Tighter this time. Her lungs still burned from lack of oxygen. She raised one hand instinctively to her throat, the tender skin throbbing where Thomas's arm had pressed. The memory of suffocation was fresh, but so was the lesson her sensei had drilled into her bones. Control your breath, control your fear, then control the fight. Donald lunged first, too impatient to wait for Thomas's command. His fist cut through the air in a wide arc, sloppy, desperate. Evelyn pivoted, letting his momentum carry him past. She placed her palm against his elbow and redirected the strike harmlessly aside, her other hand guiding his shoulder. He stumbled, momentum betraying him, and nearly crashed into the dumpster. "Useless," Thomas snapped at him. "Do it right." Charles stepped in next, his heavy frame bearing down like a freight train. Evelyn held her ground until the last moment, then dropped her weight and slid aside. She used the simplest of throws, redirecting his bulk. He hit the ground hard, his breath escaping in a grunt. The sound of his body striking pavement was sharp, final. The circle wavered. Margaret gasped audibly, her phone catching every humiliating second. "Enough games!" Thomas shouted. His voice cracked with rage, desperation seeping through. He charged, his long arms swinging. Evelyn met his wild punch with a controlled block, guiding his energy offline, then countering with a step that put him off balance. Her movements were precise, defensive, never striking, never escalating. Only control. It was second nature now. Her years of martial arts training weren't about violence. They were about survival, about turning raw aggression into emptiness. Each time Thomas lunged, he found himself redirected into air. Each time Charles pushed forward, he ended up on his knees. Each time Donald swung, he hit nothing but wind. Their frustration mounted. Their shouts grew louder. "She's playing with us!" Donald yelled, his face red, sweat dripping down his brow. Margaret's voice cut through, shrill and angry. "Hit her! Make her bleed!" Evelyn heard every word, but she also heard something deeper, the unsteadiness in their voices, the cracks in their confidence. They weren't used to opposition. They weren't used to being resisted. Their world had always bent to them, but Evelyn was not the bending kind. Thomas roared and lunged again, trying once more for the chokehold. This time, Evelyn was ready. She dipped her shoulder, stepped inside his grip, and used his momentum to send him flying over her hip. He landed flat on his back again, the air knocked from his lungs in a pitiful gasp. Donald tried next, swinging high. Evelyn deflected, pivoted, and guided him into Charles, the two of them colliding with clumsy force. They sprawled together, groaning, their bravado collapsing under the weight of their own mistakes. The onlookers who had begun gathering, students drawn by the noise, gasped in unison. Phones appeared, recording from every angle. "She's not even hitting them," one student whispered, astonished. "She's just stopping them." Evelyn kept her hands visible, movements controlled, defensive. She wasn't fighting to win, she was fighting to breathe, to endure, to stand tall without giving them ammunition. Every motion was measured restraint, the embodiment of discipline. Margaret, frustrated and desperate, lunged forward herself. She grabbed at Evelyn's hair, yanking hard to pull her off balance. Evelyn winced but reacted calmly, trapping Margaret's wrist with both hands. With a simple joint lock, she forced the cheerleader to release, applying only enough pressure to make the point. Margaret shrieked, stumbling back, clutching her wrist. Her phone wobbled and clattered to the pavement, still recording. The service lane fell quiet except for the groans of the boys and Margaret's panicked breathing. Evelyn stood at the center, chest rising and falling, her hair slightly undone, her blouse wrinkled but intact. Her hands remained loose at her sides, palms open. Her eyes, calm and steady, scanned the circle. They had come at her with cruelty, with arrogance, with numbers. They had expected fear. They had expected collapse. Instead, they had found a woman who had weathered decades of storms, who had raised children through poverty, who had buried loved ones and still risen every morning to fight for dignity. And in that moment, Evelyn Brooks was unshakable. Thomas rolled onto his side, coughing, clutching at his ribs. His voice cracked as he spat. "You're crazy. You're dead." But the bravado was gone. Fear bled through every syllable. Donald and Charles pulled themselves upright, leaning against the dumpster for support, their red jackets smeared with grime. Their eyes avoided Evelyn's. Their swagger had vanished. Margaret retrieved her phone, her hands trembling. Her once pristine uniform was smudged, her confidence shattered. She backed away, lips trembling, but still managed a bitter whisper. "You'll regret this." Evelyn said nothing. Words were unnecessary. The silence carried more weight than any retort. Ms. Patel, still standing at the service door, had witnessed everything. Papers clutched tight against her chest. She stared at Evelyn with wide eyes, not of fear, but of astonishment. She had seen Evelyn in her classroom, quiet, diligent, always respectful. But this display of control, this refusal to bow, was something extraordinary. The chemistry teacher's voice finally broke the silence, trembling but certain. "Enough," she said firmly. "This ends now." Her presence didn't stop the whispers gathering among the crowd of students pressing closer, phones raised, but it did cut the tension, snapping the spell that had held the service lane in its violent grip. Evelyn exhaled slowly, releasing the last threads of adrenaline from her veins. Her lungs still ached, her throat still throbbed where Thomas's arm had crushed it. But she stood tall. She had not raised a fist. She had not escalated. She had defended, and in doing so, she had exposed their weakness. The bullies had not expected resistance. They had never been confronted by someone who refused to crumble under pressure. Their power had always lived in fear, in silence, in twisting narratives. But Evelyn had denied them all three. And for the first time in their charmed lives, Thomas Reynolds and his pack knew what it felt like to lose. The fight for air was over. Evelyn had reclaimed hers, and with it came something even greater, proof that dignity, once tested, can become the most unshakable weapon of all. The fight had ended, but the battle for truth was only beginning. Evelyn Brooks stood in the cracked service lane, blouse wrinkled, hair slightly undone, her breath steady but her throat raw from Thomas Reynolds's chokehold. Around her, the self-proclaimed kings and queens of Grant High lay scattered and humiliated. Thomas groaned, still clutching his ribs. Donald and Charles leaned against the dumpster, dirty and bruised. Margaret Collins clutched her phone tight, her manicured nails trembling. The quiet that followed was heavy, charged. A whisper rippled through the growing crowd of students who had been drawn by the noise. Dozens now stood at the edge of the circle, phones lifted high, recording from every angle. For a moment, Evelyn believed the truth had been seen. Anyone with eyes could tell she had defended herself with restraint. Anyone with ears could hear the cruel taunts, the racial slurs, the mocking laughter. Surely, she thought, this time the evidence would be undeniable. But Evelyn had lived long enough to know that the truth, in certain hands, could be twisted like wet clay. Margaret's trembling faded. Her eyes sharpened. The fear that had flashed across her face hardened into something more dangerous. Calculation. She pressed a button on her phone, then held it to her chest like a weapon. Tears sprang to her eyes, deliberate and sudden. Her lips quivered, and she let out a wail that sliced through the murmuring crowd. "She just attacked us," Margaret cried, pointing a shaking finger at Evelyn. "We were just standing here, and she went crazy." The crowd gasped, their phones recording, their whispers multiplying. Some of the students, too far to have seen clearly, leaned in, frowning with confusion. "That's not true," Evelyn said, her voice firm, calm, though her chest tightened with dread. But Thomas, seizing Margaret's cue, stumbled to his feet, clutching his shoulder as though it had been shattered. His once arrogant smirk had transformed into a grimace of pain. He hunched over, groaning theatrically. She threw me," he wheezed. "I wasn't even touching her. She just flipped me out of nowhere." Donald chimed in quickly, his voice trembling but loud enough to be heard. "We didn't do anything. She just snapped on us." Charles, slower to catch the rhythm of the lie, finally nodded, adding, "Yeah, she's dangerous." Phones shifted, their lenses focusing now not only on Evelyn but on the supposed victims. Students began murmuring in agreement, not because they believed it yet, but because the tide of performance was powerful, and people often believe what is repeated loudly enough. Ms. Patel, who had witnessed every second from the service door, stepped forward. Her voice, though quiet, carried conviction. "That's not what happened. I saw everything. They cornered her. Thomas had her in a chokehold." Margaret cut her off with a shriek. "You're lying. You didn't see anything. Look what she did to Tom." She gestured dramatically at his dusty jacket, at the scrape on his elbow, at his pitiful act of limping in place. Students pressed closer, their whispers turning sharper. Evelyn could hear them, each one like a needle to the skin. "She's weird. Always has been. Did you see her throw him? Crazy strong for an old lady. She snapped. Somebody call security." Evelyn's throat tightened, not from the remnants of the chokehold, but from the familiar weight of injustice. She had been here before, in other forms, in other decades. She had watched the truth bend under the weight of privilege and lies. She had seen men walk free while women were blamed. She had seen black voices silenced while white narratives were polished and protected. And here it was again, playing out in a high school alleyway, with smartphones instead of newspapers, with social media instead of gossip columns. But the same old story at its core. The heavy metal door slammed open. Officer Reynolds, the school's resource officer, stepped out. His hand rested casually on his duty belt as he scanned the scene. His eyes landed on Evelyn first, then flicked to the boys groaning on the ground, then to Margaret with her tear-streaked face. "What's going on out here?" he demanded, voice sharp. Margaret wasted no time. She rushed forward, phone still clutched like evidence. "She attacked us, Officer Reynolds, out of nowhere. Look what she did to Tom. He's hurt. We have it all on video." Thomas added a pained groan, holding his shoulder like it had been dislocated. "We didn't do anything to her. She just went psycho." "That's not true," Ms. Patel interjected firmly. She stepped forward, her small frame trembling but resolute. "I saw everything. Thomas had Evelyn in a chokehold. She defended herself, nothing more." Officer Reynolds' eyes lingered on Ms. Patel for only a moment before shifting back to Margaret, who sniffled pitifully and extended her phone. "I recorded it," she said, her voice trembling with fake distress. "Here, look, Evelyn's heart dropped. She knew what Margaret's phone contained. Not the chokehold, not the taunts, not the slurs, only the end. The throws, the defensive moves, stripped of context, edited with the precision of malice." The officer didn't hesitate. He nodded, his jaw tightening. "Everyone to the principal's office," he ordered. "Now." The walk back through the school was endless. Students lined the halls, their phones out, recording as Evelyn was escorted alongside Thomas and his pack. Whispers followed her like shadows. "She went crazy. Did you see her flip him? She's dangerous." Evelyn kept her head high, though her stomach churned. She had spent a lifetime learning how to walk with dignity through hostile spaces, and she wasn't about to stop now. In the main office, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold glow on the scene. Evelyn sat stiffly in one of the hard plastic chairs. Thomas, Donald, Charles, and Margaret huddled together near the window, whispering, casting glances at her like predators who had already rewritten the story of the hunt. Ms. Patel stood close to Evelyn's chair, arms crossed, her presence steady. "I'm not leaving until I give my statement," she said when the secretary suggested she return to class. Parents began arriving quickly. Margaret's father swept in first, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored suit that screamed money. Her mother followed, dressed in tennis whites, her gold bracelet catching the light as she gestured angrily. Thomas's father entered not long after, the school board president himself, his presence sucking the air from the room. Evelyn felt her spine stiffen. She could see the system aligning against her in real time. The secretary straightened as the board president entered, her tone suddenly deferential. Officer Reynolds stood taller, almost apologetic in his presence. When Principal Carter opened his office door, his expression was grim but smooth, practiced. He invited everyone in with a gesture. Evelyn remained seated until her mother arrived, breathless and still in her hospital scrubs. Only then did she rise, clutching her mother's hand for strength. Inside, the office felt smaller than ever. The parents of the bullies loomed behind their children like a wall of authority. Ms. Patel stood near Evelyn, defiant but dwarfed by the sheer mass of power in the room. Principal Carter folded his hands on his desk. "We have a serious incident of violence on school grounds," he began. Margaret's father interrupted, his voice booming. "My daughter was attacked. We have video evidence." "Please," the principal said smoothly, nodding to Margaret. Triumphant, she stepped forward, holding out her phone. Her voice trembled with fake distress as she narrated. "We were just walking and she snapped." The video played. On the screen, Evelyn flipped Thomas, redirected Charles, blocked Donald's fists. No chokehold, no taunts, no context. Only the clean, edited picture of an older woman attacking a group of teenagers. "As you can see," Thomas's father intoned, his voice laced with authority. "This was a clear act of aggression." "That's not true," Evelyn said, her voice steady though her heart raced. "They cornered me. Thomas had me in a chokehold." "That's ridiculous," Thomas snapped. "Why would I do that?" "I saw it," Ms. Patel said, stepping forward. "I witnessed it with my own eyes." The board president turned toward her, his smile cold. "And from how far away, Miss Patel? At what angle? Were you really in a position to see clearly?" Ms. Patel's face flushed. "I was right there. I saw everything." "It seems," Principal Carter interrupted smoothly, "that your view may have been unclear. Meanwhile, we have video evidence." He tapped Margaret's phone on the desk as though it were sacred scripture. Evelyn's mother gripped her hand tighter. "This is unfair," she said, her voice cracking. "You're twisting everything." But Principal Carter had already made his decision. His tone was final, his words cutting. "Given the severity of this unprovoked attack, we have no choice but to suspend Evelyn Brooks for 2 weeks. Thomas, Donald, Charles, and Margaret will serve detention for their minor involvement." The room fell silent, heavy with the weight of injustice. Evelyn felt it pressing on her chest, that familiar suffocating burden. The truth had been smothered again, buried beneath lies and power. She looked at Margaret's smirk, at Thomas's smug tilt of the head, at the proud satisfaction in their parents' eyes, and she knew. They believed they had won, but Evelyn had survived too much to give in now. She would not let their lies be the final word. Not this time. The fluorescent lights in Principal Carter's office hummed like angry bees, a grating reminder of where Evelyn Brooks sat. The smell of old coffee and disinfectant clung to the air. She sat stiffly in one of the molded plastic chairs, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Beside her, her mother, still wearing her faded hospital scrubs after rushing from her shift, kept one hand firmly over Evelyn's, squeezing it as if sheer pressure could shield her daughter from what was coming. On the other side of the room, Thomas Reynolds, Donald Price, Charles Davis, and Margaret Collins lounged near the window like cats who had already eaten their fill. Their parents stood behind them like a phalanx of privilege. Polished shoes, pressed suits, pearl earrings, expensive perfume. When Thomas's father, the president of the school board, spoke, the room tilted his way. Principal Carter adjusted his tie, his expression grim but practiced. "We must address this incident quickly and firmly," he announced, looking around as if weighing not truth, but political fallout. "We cannot allow violence on school grounds." "Violence?" Evelyn's mother's voice cracked as she sat forward. "My daughter defended herself. They cornered her behind the school." "That's not what the evidence shows," Margaret's father interrupted, his baritone confident and sharp. "We've all seen the video. The girl lost control." He emphasized the girl, as if Evelyn were some anonymous troublemaker, not a 67-year-old woman trying to finish her diploma. Ms. Patel, standing near the back with her arms crossed tightly, spoke up. "With all due respect, that video was edited. I was there. Thomas had Evelyn in a chokehold. She only defended herself." Thomas's father, immaculately dressed and oozing authority, turned his cold smile toward the teacher. "And you're certain of what you saw? From your vantage point? Were you standing directly beside them, or were you, perhaps, distracted by those papers in your hands?" Ms. Patel flushed but didn't back down. "I was close enough to see him grab her. I know what I saw." "And yet," Principal Carter interrupted smoothly, "we must rely on tangible evidence. Video doesn't lie." He gestured toward Margaret's phone, lying on the desk like a smoking gun. Evelyn inhaled slowly, centering herself the way her sensei had taught her. She wanted to shout, to demand they see the truth, but years of experience told her what would happen if she lost composure. She kept her voice level, deliberate. "That video doesn't show the whole story. They blocked my path. They mocked me. Thomas put me in a chokehold." She lifted her chin. "I didn't throw the first punch. I didn't even punch at all. I defended myself." Thomas groaned dramatically, clutching his shoulder. "Why would I choke some old woman? She's lying." The insult stung, but Evelyn didn't flinch. Donald leaned forward, his tone dripping with false innocence. "She just snapped on us. We didn't even touch her." "Enough," Principal Carter said firmly, raising a hand. His voice carried the air of final judgment. "This is a disciplinary matter, not a debate. The administration has reviewed what we have, and the decision is made. Evelyn Brooks is suspended for 2 weeks, effective immediately." The words fell like a gavel. Evelyn's mother gasped. 2 weeks? You can't be serious. What about them? They were part of this too." "Thomas, Margaret, Donald, and Charles will receive after-school detention," Principal Carter said, almost dismissively. But the escalation of violence clearly came from Evelyn. Evelyn felt the knot tighten in her stomach, the same knot she'd felt years ago when her landlord raised the rent without warning, when the supervisor overlooked her for a promotion and handed it to a younger man who didn't know half the work. The same knot that whispered, "The system is never built for you. It is built to contain you." Her mother's voice rose. "You're punishing my daughter for protecting herself. How is that justice?" "Ma'am," Carter said smoothly, as though speaking to a child, "the rules are the rules. Violence of any kind is unacceptable. That is final." "Final?" Ms. Patel stepped forward, anger in her voice now. "You are ignoring eyewitness testimony. You are ignoring context." "Thank you, Ms. Patel," Carter said, his tone clipped. "That will be all. You may return to your classroom." For a moment, the teacher stood frozen, fists clenched at her sides. Then, with visible effort, she nodded and stepped back. But her eyes met Evelyn's briefly, full of frustration and something else: solidarity. The rest of the meeting dissolved into smug chatter among the parents. Margaret's mother patted her daughter's shoulder, murmuring comfort as though she were the victim. Thomas's father clapped his son on the back, whispering praise for his restraint. Evelyn sat quietly, her hands still folded, her mother's grip tight. When the meeting ended, Evelyn rose slowly, dignity intact despite the pounding in her chest. She walked out of the office under the weight of dozens of eyes. The hallway outside was lined with students. Phones lifted as she passed. Whispers followed her like a dark cloud. She's crazy. Did you see her flip him? She's dangerous. She kept her head high, each step measured, though every word cut deep. She had lived long enough to know when a story had already been written before she ever walked into the room. That night, home offered no refuge. The window in their small house rattled with the cold November wind. Dinner sat mostly untouched on the table. Evelyn pushed her food around her plate while her mother tried to reassure her, though the strain showed in her face. "We'll get through this," her mother said, though her voice cracked on the words. Evelyn nodded, but inside, the weight of injustice pressed harder. She walked to her bedroom later, staring at her wall of certificates, honor roll awards, and community service plaques. Achievements that had cost her sleepless nights and endless effort. Achievements now threatened by lies. Then came the call. Through the thin walls, Evelyn heard her mother's voice rise in panic. "What? Complaints? We've always paid on time. No, there must be some mistake. Please." A pause. Then a choked, "Hello? Hello." The line went dead. Her mother's sob drifted down the hall, muffled but sharp. Evelyn's fists clenched at her sides. It wasn't just the school. It wasn't just the bullies. The ripples of their power extended outward, infecting every corner of her life. Housing, stability, reputation, and Evelyn knew. They weren't done. This was bigger than one chokehold, bigger than one fight. It was the system itself, tilted, greased, polished to protect the powerful and bury the vulnerable. She sat on her bed, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her throat was still sore, her eyes still burned with injustice. But beneath it all, a fire smoldered. She whispered into the quiet room, her voice steady despite the quiver in her chest. "They think they've won. They haven't." For Evelyn Brooks, 67 years old, grandmother, student, fighter. This was no longer just about her own dignity. It was about exposing the machine that had been grinding down voices like hers for generations. And if the top was rigged, she would learn how to unrig it. The days following Evelyn Brooks's suspension crawled by with a heaviness that pressed on her chest. It wasn't only the punishment. It was the sense of being silenced yet again, of watching lies polished into truth while her dignity was scraped raw. The board president's son, Thomas Reynolds, walked the halls of Grand High with his varsity jacket back on his shoulders, smirking like nothing had happened. Margaret Collins, phone always in hand, leaned against lockers, showing snippets of her evidence to anyone who asked. Donald and Charles followed close behind, their swagger returning, though the bruises on their knuckles and scrapes on their arms told the real story. But Evelyn had seen something in the crowd that day. Small cracks in the wall of lies. Students whispering not just judgment, but doubt. Phones recording from other angles. A teacher, Miss Patel, risking her career to speak the truth. Doubt was a seed, and seeds, if tended, could grow. It began quietly. Marcus Reed, her 70-year-old friend and retired union organizer, showed up on her front porch the day after her suspension. He carried a battered laptop under one arm and 2 paper cups of diner coffee. His knuckles were rough, his eyes sharp with the kind of fire that age doesn't extinguish. It only distills. "They think they buried you," Marcus said, setting the coffee down on her kitchen table. "But they forgot something. The ground's wet. Buried things grow." Evelyn arched an eyebrow. "You sound like my pastor." "I sound like a man who's seen systems fall when the truth gets loud enough," Marcus shot back. He flipped open the laptop. "Now tell me everything, every detail." For the next 2 hours, Evelyn recounted the service lane, the chokehold, the taunts, the shove, the humiliation, and the way Margaret had spun it all into a neat lie with a few clever edits. Marcus typed, his fingers surprisingly quick for a man his age. "We build a case, Evidence, testimony, pattern. Don't just fight the kids, fight the machine that protects them. That night, Evelyn lay awake listening to the wind rattle the boards they had nailed over their broken window. She thought about her grandson, Terrence, about her mother's voice telling her sometimes standing up means showing people who you are. And she thought about Marcus's words, "The ground's wet." The next morning she rose before dawn, her hands still aching from tension. She opened her old Dell laptop, screen cracked at the corner, and began searching. Old school newspapers, local news clips, yearbooks stacked with smiling faces. Slowly, a pattern emerged. 3 years ago, a Hispanic student who filed a harassment complaint that vanished, followed weeks later by her family moving away. 2 years ago, a boy named Jason Kim, who had been a top student until his parents' restaurant was mysteriously hit with repeated health inspections. Jason transferred schools within months. The deeper Evelyn dug, the clearer it became. Her story was not unique. It was part of a chain. By the end of the week, Marcus had built a digital folder. Scans of old incident reports Ms. Patel had quietly passed to them. Screenshots of social media taunts. Names of students who had disappeared without explanation. But evidence in a folder was still silence unless someone was brave enough to shout. The shout came on Friday. Grant High's gymnasium filled with every student for the weekly assembly. The bleachers were crammed, the sound of restless chatter bouncing off the high rafters. Teachers lined the walls, clipboards in hand, keeping order. At the front, Principal Carter prepared to deliver another smooth speech about community values and respect. But before he could begin, a low hum filled the room. The large projector screen, usually reserved for pep rally videos, flickered to life. At first, the students thought it was part of the assembly. Then they saw Margaret's face on the screen, phone in hand, smirk wide, taunting Evelyn. Then Thomas's arm wrapping around Evelyn's throat, the chokehold unmistakable. Then the racial slurs, clear as day, echoing through hidden microphones and background recordings. Gasps filled the gym. A chorus of whispers rippled through the students. "That's not what they showed us. Look, he's choking her." The video continued. Multiple angles. Students' phones uploaded to a shared cloud Marcus had built. Every perspective pieced together like a quilt of truth. Evelyn breaking free. Evelyn throwing Thomas only after he attacked. Evelyn defending, always defending. "No way," a voice in the bleachers muttered. "They lied." The murmurs swelled into a roar. At the back of the gym, Margaret leapt to her feet. "That's fake! It's edited!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. But it was too late. The genie was out of the bottle. Phones lit up as students shared the footage in real time. Within minutes, clips spread across social media. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Hashtags bloomed like wildfire. By the time the principal shouted for order, the truth was already racing across the city. Ms. Patel stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "I was there. I saw it. This is the truth." Principal Carter tried to regain control, his voice sharp. "That's enough. Shut this down immediately." But students ignored him. Dozens of phones stayed lifted, recording his panic alongside the evidence. The harder he shouted, the worse it looked. By that evening, local news anchors were replaying the footage, their voices tinged with outrage. Shocking video surfaces from Grant High, student attacked, then suspended. Evelyn sat in her living room, her mother beside her, Marcus at the table typing furiously. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from strangers, from parents, from former students who had their own buried stories. Her mother, still in scrubs, placed a trembling hand on Evelyn's arm. "Baby, they're listening. Finally, they're listening." Marcus grinned grimly. "This is just the beginning. Once the public gets a hold of the truth, the system can't hide behind lies anymore." But even as hope flickered, Evelyn knew the fight wasn't over. Thomas's father still sat on the school board. Margaret's parents still wielded money and influence. Principal Carter still controlled the levers inside Grant High, and powerful people, when cornered, often strike hardest. That night, as Evelyn lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Back off, or you'll regret it." She held the phone in her hand for a long time, staring at the words glowing in the dark. Fear pricked at her spine, sharp as glass, but beneath it, something stronger burned. For the first time in weeks, she felt not just the weight of injustice, but the power of truth pressing back. The tide had begun to turn. For days after the assembly, Grant High became less a school and more a stage where the truth and the lies battled for dominance. Students whispered in the halls, teachers huddled in break rooms, parents crowded the parking lot demanding answers. The once untouchable Reynolds and Collins families now felt the sting of community outrage. Videos of Thomas's chokehold and Margaret's taunts looped endlessly across social media. The local news vans never left the curb. Headlines ran with sharp edges. Grant High under fire. Privilege and power on trial. 67-year-old student fights back. Evelyn Brooks had never asked for the spotlight, but there it was, hot, blinding, inescapable. By the end of the week, the superintendent called an emergency press conference. The gymnasium, once the scene of jeers and laughter, was packed again, this time with cameras, microphones, and anxious faces. Evelyn sat near the front, her mother gripping her hand, Marcus at her side. Ms. Patel stood behind them, eyes sharp despite the fatigue that lined her face. The superintendent cleared his throat. His voice carried the weight of a man who had been cornered by facts. Following a thorough investigation, the district has found significant evidence of misconduct, both among certain students and among staff who failed to act appropriately. Murmurs rippled across the crowd. "Effective immediately," he continued. "Principal Carter has been relieved of his duties, along with 3 administrators who participated in the suppression of complaints." The room erupted, half with shock, half with applause. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. For years, she had believed the system could never turn on itself, and yet, here it was, cracking at the seams. As for the students involved, the superintendent went on, his tone grave. Thomas Reynolds, Margaret Collins, Donald Price, and Charles Davis are hereby expelled from Grant High School. Their behavior, captured in multiple videos and corroborated by witnesses, demonstrates premeditated cruelty, physical assault, and racial harassment. Gasps. Applause. A few angry shouts from the back where the parents of those students sat, their faces red with indignation. The superintendent pressed forward. "We are also launching a district-wide initiative, including a new policy we are calling the Brooks Act. This policy will mandate immediate reporting of bullying, clear consequences for offenders regardless of family influence, and protections for students and staff who speak up." At the mention of her name, Evelyn froze. She had never imagined her quiet life, her fight for dignity, would end up etched into policy. The following week, the school board convened in a special session. This time, instead of being dragged in as a defendant, Evelyn was invited as a guest of honor. Councilwoman Patrice Dixon, a tall black woman in her 60s with a voice like steel wrapped in velvet, stood before the board. "Evelyn Brooks," she said, looking directly at her, "has shown a courage most of us only talk about. She faced down not just bullies in the hallway, but an entire system designed to silence her. That kind of bravery deserves more than applause. It deserves opportunity." The board president, no longer Thomas's father, who had resigned in disgrace, unfolded a document. "We are proud to announce the Evelyn Brooks Scholarship for Social Justice. Full tuition, awarded annually to students who demonstrate moral courage in standing against discrimination and abuse." Evelyn's hands trembled as she accepted the certificate. Her mother, tears streaming down her face, whispered, "Baby, you've turned our pain into someone else's hope." It didn't stop with the school. Churches, community centers, and neighborhood groups rallied behind Evelyn. Letters poured in from strangers, parents thanking her for standing up, students confessing that they too had been silenced, elders recalling their own battles decades earlier. On the steps of City Hall, Evelyn spoke publicly for the first time. The crowd stretched down the block. Signs held high. Justice for Evelyn. Protect our students. Truth matters. "I never wanted to be here," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the weight of the cameras. "I just wanted to finish what life had interrupted, to earn my diploma, to make my grandson proud. But when they put their hands on me, when they lied about me, when the system chose to protect them instead of the truth, I knew silence was no longer an option." Her words carried, not because they were loud, but because they rang with the clarity of lived truth. 3 weeks later, Grant High's gymnasium buzzed again, but this time with joy. Blue mats covered the floor. A banner hung overhead. "Stand Strong, Student Self-Defense and Empowerment Program." Evelyn, dressed in a black jai with her brown belt tied neatly, stood at the center. Students of every grade filed in, nervous but eager. Ms. Patel held a clipboard, her new title, Student Advocacy Director, embroidered on her jacket. "Self-defense isn't about fighting," Evelyn told the circle of students. "It's about knowing your worth. It's about standing steady when others try to knock you down. And it's about community, protecting each other, not just yourself." They practiced wrist escapes, balanced stances, and safe falls. Some stumbled, some laughed, some blushed. But all of them tried. And as Evelyn moved among them, correcting gently, praising firmly, she felt something shift. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was theirs too. From the bleachers, her grandson Terrence watched with wide eyes. When she caught his gaze, he grinned and gave her a small thumbs up. Her heart swelled. For him, she thought, for all of them. Months later, when the media frenzy had calmed and the policies were written into practice, Evelyn sat quietly in her kitchen, sipping coffee from her chipped mug. Marcus joined her, newspaper in hand. The headline read, "Brooks Act Changes Schools Across State." He chuckled. "You realize you've started something bigger than this town, don't you?" Evelyn smiled faintly, the lines around her eyes deepening. "I didn't start it. I just refused to let it keep going." Her mother, seated nearby with her knitting, added softly, "Sometimes that's all it takes. One person saying no more." Evelyn looked out the window at the morning sun breaking through the clouds. The world still carried its injustices. She knew that well. But she had also learned something vital. Lies can thrive in silence, but truth, once spoken and shared, has a way of multiplying. And dignity, once defended, can ripple outward, turning one woman's survival into a community's strength. Evelyn Brooks had not only earned her diploma, she had earned a legacy, her name on a scholarship, her courage written into school policy, her example embedded in the lives of students who now practiced standing tall. The bullies who once circled her were gone, their power dismantled. But Evelyn's quiet strength remained, louder than any of their jeers had ever been. Moral. In a world quick to judge and slow to listen, it takes bravery, clarity, and an unwavering love of truth to transform injustice into change. One woman's courage can become a shield for many. And sometimes the most powerful victories come not from striking hardest, but from standing firm the longest. Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. For Evelyn Brooks, what began as one afternoon's humiliation in a back alley behind Grant High became a turning point that revealed truths many of us have long known, but sometimes try to forget. Her struggle was not just about defending herself from a chokehold or clearing her name against lies. It was about exposing how power works, how courage grows, and how dignity, once defended, can ripple outward. From her story come 3 lessons worth carrying close to the heart. Lesson 1. Truth needs a voice, even when the system wants silence. For much of Evelyn's life, she had been told, directly and indirectly, that silence was the safest path. Don't stir the pot. Don't challenge the order. Keep your head down. But when Thomas's arm tightened around her throat, when Margaret's phone twisted her pain into entertainment, silence nearly suffocated her. And when the principal's office tried to bury the truth under polished lies, silence would have sealed her defeat. Speaking up, gathering evidence, sharing her story, these became her lifeline. Truth does not walk into the light on its own. It requires someone willing to raise their voice, even when that voice shakes. Evelyn's story reminds us that silence protects the oppressor, but truth, once spoken, carries the power to spread further than any lie. Lesson 2. Dignity is not given. It is defended. Dignity is not a gift handed down by principals, board presidents, or wealthy parents. It is something each of us must claim and defend. Evelyn never raised her fists in anger. She never lashed out. She defended herself with discipline, with skill, with restraint. And in doing so, she demonstrated a deeper kind of strength, the kind rooted in self-respect. Too often, the system punishes those who resist injustice while excusing those who wield it. But Evelyn's calm defiance exposed the imbalance for all to see. For older Americans who have lived through decades of being told to know your place, this lesson rings loud. Dignity isn't granted by authority. It is forged by standing tall when others try to cut you down. Lesson 3. One person's courage can become a shield for many. Evelyn's fight was hers, but its outcome reached far beyond her own life. Policies were rewritten. A scholarship was created. Young students now walk the halls knowing there are protections her struggle helped secure. This is the ripple effect of courage. When one person dares to stand, it gives permission for others to rise. At 67 years old, Evelyn showed a generation of young people that strength does not fade with age, it deepens. Her story proves that no matter how small or isolated we feel, one voice of courage can shift the weight of an entire system. These lessons are not abstract. They are as real as the cracked pavement in that schoolyard, and as sharp as the bruises Evelyn carried home. They are reminders that life's battles are rarely fair, but fairness is not the measure of our worth. The measure is whether we face those battles with clarity, with restraint, and with a refusal to bow when the truth is on our side. For those of us who have lived long enough to see patterns repeat, who have felt the sting of being overlooked or the burden of carrying on quietly, Evelyn's story is more than inspiration. It is a call to remember that our years have not dulled our strength. They have sharpened it. And the greatest legacy we leave behind may not be in what we achieve for ourselves, but in the doors our courage opens for others. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment when standing up for the truth cost you something, but staying silent would have cost you even more? Evelyn's story shows us how courage, even when it comes late in life, can ripple out to protect an entire community. I'd love to hear your own experiences or lessons you've carried through struggles. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a like if the message touched you, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story that just might change how you see life.